I let him in that night, my husband's best friend. One bottle of wine, a few lingering glances, and suddenly, I was standing on the edge of a line I swore I'd never cross. What happened next would change everything. This is the story of how I almost lost it all. My husband, Alex, and I had been married for 7 years. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple, stable, loving, and deeply committed. Alex was the kind of man who always put others first. He was dependable, kind, and had a way of making me feel secure. We had built a life together, filled with routines and small, comforting rituals. Weekend barbecues, movie nights, and lazy Sunday mornings. I loved him, and I truly believed our love was unshakable. Then there was Sam, Alex's best friend since college. Sam was like family to us. He was charming, witty, and always the center of attention. He'd been a constant presence in our lives, joining us for dinners, game nights, and even family vacations. I never thought much about him. He was just Sam, Alex's goofy best friend, who always knew how to make everyone laugh. But something changed a few months ago. Sam started visiting more often, even when Alex wasn't home. He'd show up with excuses like, "I was in the neighborhood," or "I thought you might need help with something." At first, I didn't think much of it. Sam was just being Sam, friendly, helpful, and always there. But then I started noticing little things. The way his eyes lingered on me a little too long, the way he always seemed to know exactly what to say to make me smile. One evening, after a dinner party, Alex went to bed early, exhausted from work. Sam stayed behind to help me clean up. We talked for hours about movies, books, life. I found myself laughing more than I had in months. Then, as we reached for the same plate, our hands brushed. It was such a small thing, but I felt a spark that I couldn't ignore. I tried to shake it off. This was Sam, Alex's best friend. Nothing could happen between us. But the more he visited, the more I found myself looking forward to his company. I felt guilty, but I couldn't deny the growing tension between us. It was like we were both tiptoeing around something we weren't ready to admit. The tension between Sam and me grew with each passing week. It wasn't anything obvious, just little things that made my heart race. He'd find excuses to drop by when Alex wasn't home, and I'd catch him looking at me in a way that made my stomach twist. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew something was shifting. One night, after Alex had gone to bed, Sam and I stayed up talking. The conversation turned serious, and he said something that stopped me in my tracks. "Alex is lucky to have you," he said, his voice soft. "He doesn't tell you that enough, does he?" I froze, unsure how to respond. My heart pounded as I tried to laugh it off, but his words lingered in my mind. After that night, things felt different. Every time Sam was around, I felt a mix of excitement and guilt. I started noticing how often he'd text me, asking how my day was, or if I needed anything. It was innocent enough, but it felt like more. I found myself waiting for his messages, my heart skipping a beat every time my phone buzzed. The guilt was overwhelming. I loved Alex, but I couldn't ignore the way Sam made me feel. Seen, appreciated, alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I tried to push those feelings aside, to remind myself of everything Alex and I had built together. But the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger the pull became. I knew I was walking a dangerous line, but I couldn't stop myself. Every glance, every touch, every word between us felt charged with something unspoken. And then one night, everything changed. The tension between Sam and me became impossible to ignore. It was in the way he looked at me, the way his voice softened when he said my name, and the way he always seemed to find a reason to be near me. I told myself it was harmless, that I was just imagining things. But deep down I knew it was more. One evening, Alex was working late again, and Sam came over to help me with a home improvement project. We were in the kitchen, and he was handing me tools, guiding me through the steps. His hands brushed against mine several times, each touch sending a jolt of electricity through me. It was a small thing, but it felt huge. I tried to focus on the task at hand, but my mind was racing. Then, out of nowhere, Sam stopped what he was doing and looked at me. His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. For the first time in ages, I felt truly seen. "Sarah," he said, his voice low. "I don't want to make things weird between us, but—" He trailed off, his face inches from mine. I could feel his breath on my skin, and my heart was hammering in my chest. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to pull away, to tell him to stop. But another part of me wanted to lean in, to see where this would go. The air between us was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Just as I was about to say something, the front door creaked open. We both jumped back, startled. Alex walked in, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Hey babe, how's it going?" he asked, looking between us. I forced a smile, trying to sound casual. "Everything's fine," I said, but my voice shook. Sam nodded, though I could tell he wasn't convincing. He looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place, and then he left. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what had almost happened. The guilt was overwhelming, but so was the pull I felt towards Sam. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. Every time I saw him, the tension between us grew, and I found myself wondering what would happen if we crossed that line. The tension between Sam and me had reached a breaking point. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, but I couldn't stop myself. Every time I saw him, my heart raced, and I felt a mix of guilt and excitement that I couldn't shake. I told myself I was in control, that nothing would happen. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. One evening, Alex was working late again, and Sam called me. "Hey Sarah," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "I know Alex isn't home tonight. I was wondering if you wanted to grab dinner, just the two of us." My heart skipped a beat. I knew I should say no, that I should put an end to this before it went too far. But instead, I heard myself say, "Why don't we just have dinner here? It'll be quieter." When Sam arrived, the atmosphere between us was charged. We sat down to eat, but it felt like we weren't really talking about the food. Every word, every glance felt loaded with meaning. I could feel the tension building, and I knew something was about to happen. Then, out of nowhere, Sam leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Sarah," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "Do you ever think about what this could be? Us?" My breath hitched, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to pull away, to tell him this was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself leaning in, just a little, my body betraying my mind. For a split second, I almost let myself fall into it. But then, I snapped back to reality. "Sam, stop," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "We can't do this. I love Alex. I can't do this to him." Sam didn't move. He just sat there looking at me, his eyes searching mine. "I know," he said finally, his voice soft and regretful. "I just needed to know if you felt the same way." I stood up, feeling dizzy. "I don't know what I feel," I admitted, gesturing between us. "But this isn't right. I can't do this to Alex. I can't do this to us." Sam stood up too, his shoulders slumping. He nodded, but I could see the pain in his eyes. "I understand," he said quietly. "I really do. I needed to know." He picked up his jacket and headed toward the door. "Good night, Sarah," he said, turning back to look at me one last time. "Good night, Sam," I whispered, my voice barely audible. When the door closed behind him, I felt a mix of relief and guilt. I knew I had done the right thing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed forever. The next few days were a blur. I tried to act normal around Alex, but everything felt off. I could see the concern in his eyes, like he knew something was different. But I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. How could I explain what had almost happened? How could I admit that I had come so close to betraying him? The days after Sam left that night felt like a blur. I tried to act normal around Alex, but everything felt off. I couldn't stop replaying the evening in my mind. The way Sam had looked at me, the way I had almost let myself fall into something I knew was wrong. The guilt was overwhelming, and it gnawed at me constantly. Alex noticed something was different. He'd look at me with concern in his eyes, asking if I was okay. "Just tired," I'd say, forcing a smile. But I could tell he wasn't convinced. He didn't push me, though, and for that I was grateful. How could I explain what had happened when I didn't even fully understand it myself? Sam and I didn't talk for a while after that night. He respected the boundaries I had set, but I could feel the tension between us every time we were in the same room. It was like we were both pretending nothing had happened, but the weight of it hung in the air, suffocating and undeniable. Then one evening, Sam called me. My heart raced as I stared at my phone, unsure whether to answer. But I couldn't stop myself. "Hey, Sarah," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay after everything." I froze, unsure how to respond. "Sam, we can't do this," I said, my voice tight. "I'm married. I love Alex. This has to stop." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I know," Sam said finally, his voice heavy with regret. "But I can't stop thinking about you, Sarah. I can't just pretend like nothing happened." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to tell him to leave me alone, to walk away and never look back. But part of me couldn't let go. The guilt was unbearable. I loved Alex, but I couldn't ignore the way Sam made me feel, seen, appreciated, alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I knew I was risking everything, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. Every time I looked at Alex, I saw the man I loved, but I also saw the absence of what I needed. I was torn between two worlds, and I didn't know how to choose. The fallout from that night had left me feeling lost and confused, and I knew that no matter what I did, things would never be the same. Looking back, I realize how close I came to losing everything. The guilt still lingers, a constant reminder of the choices I almost made. I love Alex, and I always have, but in that moment of weakness, I let myself forget what truly mattered. It's a mistake I'll carry with me forever. Sam and I haven't spoken since that night. He respected my decision to end things, but I know it wasn't easy for him. I hope he finds happiness, but I also know that what happened between us was wrong. It was a moment of temptation, but it wasn't worth the pain it could have caused. Alex never found out about what almost happened, and I'm grateful for that. But the guilt has changed me. I've learned that love isn't just about passion or excitement, it's about trust, loyalty, and the choices we make every day. I've worked hard to rebuild the trust between us, to remind myself of why I fell in love with Alex in the first place. This experience has taught me that temptation is everywhere, but it's up to us to choose what's right. I could have lost everything, my marriage, my family, my self-respect, but I stopped myself before it was too late. It's a lesson I'll never forget. No matter how tempting something seems, it's never worth losing the people who truly love you. I've learned to appreciate what I have, to cherish the life Alex and I have built together. Love isn't always easy, but it's worth fighting for. And I'll never take it for granted again. If you were in Sarah's position, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more shocking stories like this. You won't believe what's coming next.